Alright, update. I have totally changed how I approach building guns in this game. You may remember the last time we talked, I said that, actually, recoil control is important, or grip is important. And so I've been trying to better incorporate that into how I build the gun. And I've also been trying to synergize my attachment choices. And what I mean by that is, and I think this is deliberate in the way that they've set up the attachments, certain attachments have penalties to them. And what I'm looking for is a well-rounded weapon build that's versatile, that I don't have to make any compromises on. Right? You'll remember I used to be using short barrels on guns that obviously nerfs your muzzle velocity, and you can really feel that when trying to engage targets at range. And obviously, I was also taking ADS movement speed and spread penalties from using vertical grips. And I don't know why this didn't dawn on me earlier, but you don't actually have to accept those penalties. There are ways to mitigate the penalties for most attachments in order to just be left with the positive attributes, thus making whatever build you're going for a pure upgrade over the stock weapon. You just have to pay attention to what those penalties are and what attachments counteract them. So I'm going to walk you through. I'm going to start with a stock version of the SG553 here, which is what I've been leveling at the moment. You can see I've got it to 48, so I've almost mastered it, and then I'll move on to the Grot. So let me start with the stock weapon and walk you through the process of how I've come to this new, more well-rounded, no downsides, no compromises, much easier to use, much more controllable gun build. So first things first, sight selection. My new favorite sights are ones that use chevron reticles. So that's your OSA 7 here, which is a 1x, right? Everyone's favorite Russian hunting sight. It's too flimsy for actual military use, but that doesn't matter in a video game because we don't have to worry about that kind of thing. However, one-time sights can make it difficult to see targets at range, and with the kind of build I'm going to be using here, it's much easier to engage targets at range, especially in full auto. So I don't use one-time sights unless the recoil on the gun is particularly bad and it needs that visual recoil reduction. So on a gun like, the Tavor here, as you can see, obviously I'm going to use the one-time sight, because if you put a higher magnification sight on this thing, it kicks all over the place. But in general, if I can get away with it, if the recoil makes it comfortable, I prefer to use the 2.5 times chevron scope here, because it is a nice big viewing window. And the advantage of chevrons over the dots that most other sights use is that they don't cover your point of aim, which is especially a problem in this game because the dots can get very fat and very large. Whereas with a chevron, your point of aim is directly above the point of the chevron, so you can always see what you're shooting at. Much clearer sight picture. So that's why I've switched to these. There's also the 4x here, the ACOG, and I really like the sight picture on this, but having a 4x magnification can make it quite awkward to engage targets at closer ranges. So even though I really like the sight picture on this, I don't tend to use it. I tend to go with the 2.5 times chevron scope here. So those are the sights I'm using. Obviously, if you've played the game, you want a suppressed weapon. Okay, you want the gun to be suppressed because it eliminates the spotting pip above your head, and it keeps you off the minimap outside of 15 meters. If you don't use one, you're making yourself a more obvious target. Everybody who knows anything about how the game works uses a suppressor. You want a suppressor. Which suppressor do you use? The lightning suppressor is weird. You can see it doesn't actually increase your control stat because it doesn't directly influence the intensity of your recoil. It reduces its buildup and improves its recovery. The exact mechanics of how that works, I've never seen anyone actually test or even figure out how to test exactly what that means. The net effect is that it does seem like, from all the spraying I've done, all over the walls here, is it does seem to reduce the vertical recoil. It does, the net effect. But because it doesn't reduce the intensity, I find it tends to be more wobbly with the horizontal recoil than, saving the points on the lightning suppressor, going down to the standard suppressor, and just upgrading your grip instead, which increases your control stat and decreases the actual intensity of the recoil. If someone comes up with a test that actually determines that actually the build-up reduction from the suppressor is actually better than the improvements you get from your grip, if someone can empirically prove that, sure, switch to the lightning suppressor, but until someone can prove that, as far as I can tell from using it, I feel like the horizontal recoil with the lightning suppressor is more wobbly when paired with a lower tier grip than by using a standard suppressor and using a higher tier grip. You might say, why not use the CQB suppressor? The CQB suppressor has no hip fire penalty. And that's what we're going for after all, right? We're trying to not have any penalties here, no compromises. Well, here's the thing. Assuming you don't care about the visibility penalty of using a visible laser, so a green or blue laser, that's not the most efficient use of 30 points. Because instead of spending 30 points to have no penalty, what you could do instead is spend 20 points on standard suppressor, and then 10 points on a green laser, which has a big enough hip fire bonus that it not only negates the one hip fire tier penalty from the suppressor, but then brings you up a hip fire tier on top of that. So you're not only getting a suppressed weapon, but also getting a hip fire penalty for the same number of points as a CQB suppressor. I have changed my mind again on visible lasers. Yes, if you're not careful about how you use them in CQB, they can give you away because they'll poke out from behind obstacles and corners and whatnot. If you're not intelligent about where you're pointing the end of your weapon, literally, you can counteract this by just making sure to aim at the edges of doorways and objects rather than past them, and then flick onto people as soon as they come around. Because then, until you actually see them, the beam is going into an object, so they can't see it. Now, yes, if you're aiming at someone within 25 meters, if you aim at someone while you have one of these lasers on, and you are going to want to keep them on, because otherwise you'll suffer the hip fire penalty from the suppressor you have on, so you want to keep it on. If they're looking at you, they'll see they'll pretty easily see your glowing laser, and it'll give your position away. That's not a huge deal because presumably you're already shooting at them when you do that. And suppressors still give you away on the minimap within 15 meters anyway. So there is a slight player visibility penalty to doing this, but I think the number of times it's going to get you killed as opposed to the number of times that having worse hip fire in CQB is going to get you killed, I don't think it's even close. So I've gone back to using visible lasers. And it also allows you to get better hip fire than you would if you were just sticking with the stupid old red laser. So there's that. Okay, we got 40 points left. So we got our hip fire bonus. Now we need our spread and recoil bonuses. That primarily comes from your grip, especially the recoil. Now, you might think, well, we got 40 points left. Stick on the 35-point vertical. Why not? It has the biggest, as you can see, it has the biggest precision and control bonuses. But, as the mobility bar penalty there kind of indicates, although it doesn't tell you exactly what it is, you got to read the description. It has 2 penalties. Now, from my testing, these higher tier grips have sort of an ESL problem here. I don't think these grips actually decrease your ADS accuracy. In fact, the stat bar tells you that can't be true because it's increasing your precision stat, which is basically your reduction in ADS spread, right? The better your precision stat, the lower your ADS cone of fire. So that doesn't make any sense. It can't be reducing your ADS accuracy, but also somehow increasing it because the precision's going up when you equip it. That doesn't make any sense. I think what's happening here is whoever wrote the descriptions for these higher tier grips is ESL, and so they wrote it as movement, not movement speed and accuracy, but movement speed and accuracy, as in movement speed and movement accuracy, as in your movement speed is reduced and your movement accuracy, your accuracy while moving, is reduced, which makes a lot more sense because that's the penalty that the lower tier grips also have. They have an ADS accuracy penalty while you're moving. And from any testing I've done, again, I've done a lot of sprays all over the walls of these firing ranges. That does appear to be the case. There doesn't appear to be any precision penalty at all when you're standing still with these vertical grips, but there is when you start moving. Of course, the problem there is we only have 5 points left. There are attachments that you could equip that counteract both of these penalties, but you can't with only 5 points left. So, we're going to have to go down 1 tier. We're going to have to go down to the 25-point vertical. Now we have 15 points to play with, and that is exactly enough points to counteract both of these penalties, because it has the same penalties. ADS movement speed reduction and ADS moving spread reduction. For the movement speed penalty, easy peasy, lightweight ammo. Lightweight ammo improves your ADS movement speed. Boom. That's gone. ADS moving spread, there's 2 ways you can reduce that. One is with a light barrel. The light barrel increases your ADS movement accuracy. Boom. Neutralizes that penalty. However, not all guns have light barrels. So, what you can also do is use the 20-point blue laser, which has the same hip fire bonus as the 10-point green laser, but also increases ADS moving spread. Sorry, decreases ADS moving spread. Same bonus as the light barrel, but the difference is every weapon can get the 20-point blue laser, whereas not every weapon has the light barrel. Which makes this a universal attachment combination. Any gun can use this. And it is awesome. It is so controllable. Now, obviously, the spread will still kill you at that range, but that's the 50-meter target there. Look at that. You can quite easily full auto people to death while moving at 50 meters. And if the RNG's on your side, you can even do it at 70 meters, like you just saw there. Like, look at that. There's barely any vertical recoil, and especially after the nerf, this gun has more horizontal recoil than it did, a month ago. But it's much better than it is stock. So this means you can quite comfortably keep strafing in gunfights. You don't have to feel like you need to stop because there's no ADS spread penalty, or at least no more than normal. But you also get reduced ADS spread, reduced recoil, and on top of all of that, you also get a little hipfire penalty. You probably still shouldn't use it within outside of 10 meters, but even within 15, it might be usable. So this is just a straight upgrade over the stock weapon in every possible way. Right? This is how I've got this gun built. Oh no, I've still got this on the old version. I have this on a test. I switched this to a test build when I was testing stuff earlier. Okay, I don't have this set up. I don't have this set up the way I did before. Okay. You can see, if I strip all these parts off and put this back to bare, which is what I normally keep it at, just so I can compare stats at a glance. It's just a straight upgrade. Hipfire bonus, precision bonus, control bonus. It's just better in every way. No downsides, no penalties. I like to call this the Gun Mark II build, right? It's just the gun, but better. It's more controllable. It's more accurate, both in hipfire and ADS. It's just easier to use. It's easier to get bullets on target. Now you can use this build on any gun, because any gun can fit a vertical grip, blue laser, standard suppressor, although there might be a few guns that don't have lightweight ammo. Like off the top of my head, the M7 doesn't have lightweight ammo, so you can't counteract the ADS movement speed penalty. But most guns do have lightweight ammo, so most guns can use this build. However, there is a variant of this that I also want to bring your attention to, which you can see me using on several ARs here, like the Cord, the modernized AEK. And this build just changes the barrel and the grip. Instead of using the basic barrel, if the gun has a heavy barrel, I switch it to the heavy barrel. Because the heavy barrel gives you a ADS spread reduction for an ADS time penalty, which you can counteract by going from the 25-point vertical to the 30-point stubby, which counteracts that ADS time penalty. So what you're left with is a gun that has slightly worse recoil, but slightly less recoil, but also slightly less ADS spread than the basic barrel plus 25-point vertical grip version. If you care more about recoil control, you don't have to use this, but if you like having less spread, which I do, because spread is really what kills you when full autoing people at range, right? The spread is what kills you. So if a gun has a heavy barrel, I like to switch to the heavy barrel plus 30-point stubby to reduce that spread even more. And I just live with the slightly higher recoil, because I hate the spread more. Because, and I'm going to make a separate video about this, I don't like the existence of variable cones of fire in games that have ADS, but that's a separate topic. So I like to minimize that as much as possible. You might ask, why am I not using the heavy extended barrel, which the AEK actually doesn't have, but like every other gun that does have a heavy barrel does have, right? The G36 has a heavy barrel, has a heavy extended barrel, right? This gives you more muzzle velocity, but it does have an additional penalty for that muzzle velocity, which is it increases your weapon draw speed. Now, just like with the basic barrel and the vertical grip, and the heavy barrel and the stubby grip, the heavy extended barrel synergizes with the angled grips, because the angled grips increase your weapon draw speed and your ADS time. So they neutralize both of the penalties of the heavy extended barrel, allowing you to get a little more precision and increased bullet velocity. And that's absolutely something that you can do. Me personally, I'm just a stickler for reducing spread, not to the point that I would give up, the suppressor and equip one of the brakes, but because you have to downgrade from the 30-point stubby to the 25-point angled to do this, you're giving up a tad of precision, because the angle grips just have slightly worse stats than the stubby and vertical grips. And I just don't want to do that in exchange for the increased bullet velocity. I just don't want to. I don't care all that much about it. So I prefer to stick with the heavy plus stubby combo. But if you do care about the muzzle velocity, and I know a lot of people do, absolutely, switch to the heavy extended barrel, full angled grip, and then you got 5 extra points. If the gun's got a mag catch, spend it on the mag catch, get a little faster reload. G36 doesn't have a mag catch, so spend it on the lightweight ammo. You get increased ADS moving speed. Absolutely a viable build. I'm just a stickler for maximum spread reduction without getting rid of the suppressor. So that's why I stick with this combo. I absolutely love how this combo shoots. I love how it feels, right? It's so much more controllable and so much easier to keep on target than what I was using before. And I would highly recommend that you switch to something similar to this. Because there are literally no downsides. Like I said, all the penalties of all of these attachments are neutralized by each other, leaving it with just positive attributes. Better hip fire, better precision, better control. Period. Now there's ways you can tweak this to be more biased towards particular stats. If you wanted to, you could, for instance, downgrade the grip in order to upgrade the hip fire, right? If you wanted max hip fire, what you do is you go for, say, the maxed out blue laser, and then the vertical grip. Or assuming you're not using a heavy barrel, you could instead go down all the way to a 10-point vertical. The ADS moving spread penalty is still counteracted by the blue laser, and then go up to a CQB suppressor. So now you got crazy hip fire and a little bit of recoil control and crazy hip fire. Again, for no penalty. Right? You can also do this. It's just going to be a little more awkward to shoot at range. But you can also do this. And admittedly, I haven't played around enough with this variant to know if I like it better than the one that has the higher tier grip on it. I just want you to keep in mind, look for synergies. Look for attachments that either have no penalties or cancel each other's penalties out. You don't need to make sacrifices to make guns better. You can make guns better flat out, as long as you pick the right attachments. So that's my new advice. I'm going to play around with this hip fire build here and see if the decreased recoil control pisses me off enough that I downgrade it. But either way, that's all I have for you today. Until I come up with some other revelation, I'll catch you later.